Hello, everybody. We're going to start off chapter 9, which is about cellular respiration, with this little intro into kind of what cellular respiration is. So this is intro, part 1. So just a quick overview. Life is work. This is pretty much what we all know. But what that means is that living cells require energy from outside sources. Okay, they have to consume energy in order to have energy to do work. Okay, some animals like chimpanzees obtain energy by eating plants. Okay, and some animals feed on other organisms that eat plants. And animals that consume food energy are called heterotrophs. Okay. Oh, look, there's a heterotroph. And he's eating on the plant, which is the autotroph. Because they get energy as well, but they get it from the sun. And energy flows into an ecosystem as sunlight and leaves as heat. And that, my friends, is our entropy. Okay. Photosynthesis generates oxygen and organic molecules, glucose, G-L-U-C, can't spell. G-L-U-C-O-S-E. And those are used in cellular respiration. So cells use chemical energy stored in organic molecules, glucose, to generate or regenerate rather ATP, and that powers our cellular work. So if we look at this super fun graphic, and by the way, this is a graphic that I would probably learn because it kind of sums up the whole interaction between photosynthesis and cellular respiration. And remember in chapter 8, when we talked about energy coupling? So coupling or pairing together an endergonic process with an exergonic process. Okay, this is kind of like the Mac Daddy of all energy coupling. Okay, so photosynthesis harvests light energy from the sun and stores it in organic molecules. In the process, it releases oxygen, which is really a waste product of photosynthesis. But conveniently enough, we need that oxygen to run cellular respiration. We're going to talk about the role that oxygen plays in just a minute. Cellular respiration releases the energy stored in the organic molecules by photosynthesis and uses that energy to power the production of ATP. In that process, it releases carbon dioxide and water as its products, and those are the building blocks that photosynthesis uses to make its organic molecules. So you see, it's kind of this cycle, okay? We can't do one without the other. So let's get into the role of oxygen. And catabolic pathways yield energy by oxidizing organic fuels. And let's look at a couple of processes that play a role in kind of what we call cellular respiration, or the way we get the energy out of organic fuels. So the breakdown of organic molecules is exergonic, and in our body, that is a catabolic pathway. Two main exergonic pathways play a role in cellular respiration. One is fermentation, and fermentation is the partial degradation of sugar that occurs without oxygen, so it's anaerobic. Okay. And aerobic means with oxygen, so anaerobic means without. And then the second process is aerobic respiration, consumes organic molecules with oxygen in the presence of oxygen and yields ATP. So aerobic respiration is a higher energy output. Higher energy output. Okay. Anaerobic respiration also produces ATP, but much less, and it consumes compounds other than oxygen. All right, so cellular respiration includes both aerobic and anaerobic respiration, but is often used to just refer to the aerobic part. Carbohydrates, fats, and proteins are all consumed as fuel. The cellular respiration really focuses on the sugar glucose. And this here is the summary reaction for cellular respiration. Okay, and this is kind of an overall reaction. We start with the products, and these are the we do not start with the products. We start with the reactants and yield these products. Okay, but it's not a one-step thing. It's actually an over 30-step thing. So this reaction is a summary reaction, but you do need to know this as well. Learn this. You've got to memorize this reaction if you don't know it already. All right, so this reaction is what we call a redox reaction. And I think that when I talked to you guys in class, most of you did not study oxidation and reduction in chemistry. So let's go over it now. So oxidation and reduction follows the transfer of electrons during chemical reactions. Okay, so this transfer releases energy and releases the energy stored in organic molecules. Okay, the energy is ultimately used to synthesize ATP. So in order to kind of see where the energy is going and how it is released, we're going to look at what oxidation and reduction are. So the principle of the redox reaction, okay, is chemical reactions transfer electrons between reactants, and they're called oxidation reduction reactions or redox reactions. So the first step, or actually one step, the oxidation step, okay, in oxidation, a substance loses electrons, okay? So I always learned it, oxidation is a loss of electrons, and they both have the letter O in it, oxidation and loss. And in this process, it becomes oxidized, okay? In the reduction half, the substance gains electrons or is reduced, okay? And the amount of positive charge is reduced. So think of it that way. So let's have a look at a reaction we're probably all pretty familiar with. Formation of the ionic compound sodium chloride. Sodium, as we know, loses an electron and becomes a positive ion, okay? So it loses an electron, so it becomes oxidized. That electron is gained by chlorine, so chlorine becomes reduced. Okay, and if we look at that in a more general scheme, because we're not going to be looking at ionic compounds, we're actually going to be looking at molecular compounds, which have covalent bonds. We'll get to that in a minute. So if we look at this kind of in a more general scheme, compound X, this is not xenon. Compound X, which has an electron, loses that electron, okay, and becomes oxidized. Okay, oxidized, you lose an electron. Compound Y, not yttrium, becomes reduced because it gains the electron that compound X lost. Okay. All right. So so if you lose an electron, you become oxidized. If you gain an electron, you become reduced. Now, to make it even more fun, the compound that loses the electron, compound X here, because it is giving its electron to someone else, it's called a reducing agent. Reducing agent. Okay, so the compound that loses the electron is the reducing agent because it reduces, it becomes oxidized, but in the process of becoming oxidized, it gives its electron to something else, so it reduces that other molecule. Compound Y, because it is gaining the electron, but it's taking the electron away from the other one. The other compound is called the oxidizing agent. Oxidizing. I'm having spelling challenges today. Oxidizing agent. Pull that down there a little bit. Okay. And this is explained a little bit better on the next slide. So the electron donor, so the one that loses the electron, is the reducing agent because it causes the other compound to be reduced. The electron acceptor is called the oxidizing agent because it takes the oxygen away, takes the electron away from the other compound. Okay. Now, when you're making ionic compounds, yes, there's this complete transfer of electron, as we saw with the sodium and the chlorine. But most redox reactions, or at least the ones that we're going to study, don't transfer electrons between elements, but they change the electron sharing in covalent bonds. Okay, so let's look at an example of a redox reaction between methane and oxygen, because this is more of what we're going to be doing. So if you look here, methane is a nonpolar compound, so there's kind of an even sharing of the electrons, okay? And then if we just look at the carbon compound on the other side, the product is carbon dioxide. And if you look here, because now it's paired with oxygen, oxygen has a much higher electronegativity, so it's going to hog the electrons, attract the electrons towards itself. So carbon, because it's not sharing them equally anymore, is in a sense losing the electrons. So it is becoming oxidized, okay? And then, so that means methane is a reducing agent. Okay, and then if you look at oxygen, okay, oxygen here is kind of, it has an equal share of the electrons, okay? And then as it gets converted into water, again, it's in now a polar covalent bond. So the electron sharing is increased for oxygen. So it in a sense gains electrons because the sharing is now unequal in oxygen's favor. And that makes oxygen, not surprisingly, an oxidizing agent. Okay, so now let's look at how this is going to work for cellular respiration. So cellular respiration, the fuel, such as glucose, is oxygen, and oxygen is reduced. So if we look at our summary reaction for cellular respiration, okay, the carbon in glucose is going to lose electrons because of moving from a non-polar bond to a polar bond. So it becomes oxidized, and glucose is my reducing agent. Okay, and oxygen is going to gain electrons because it's going from a non-polar covalent bond to a polar covalent bond. So it is going to become reduced, and oxygen, again, is pretty much always the oxidizing agent. It's kind of how we got the name for it. Okay, so that sums up redox reactions. I am sure you're going to ask me about those in class because they are confusing, but we have to have a basic understanding before we can move forward. So that's it for redox reactions, and stay tuned for